The wind was bitter that morning, but she had bundled herself up in her nicest coat, the navy one with the velvet collar. In her hands, she clutched a small wicker basket wrapped in red cellophane, tied neatly with a golden ribbon. Inside were the same things she brought every year: homemade cinnamon cookies, her special cranberry loaf, and a little hand-knitted reindeer sweater for her grandson Ethan. It was tradition. It was love. It was her way of saying, "I'm still here." She stood at the foot of the porch, her boots crunching softly on the gravel path, her breath curling like smoke in the cold air. Christmas decorations blinked weakly in the early light, plastic candy canes in the yard, a blow-up Santa slowly deflating from the night chill. The door was closed, but she could hear laughter from inside. Music too. Familiar carols she used to hum while cooking holiday meals. For a moment she smiled. For a moment, she believed she would be welcomed in. The door opened. It was not her son who stood there, but her daughter-in-law. Marla's expression was neutral. No smile, no warmth. Just surprise, maybe discomfort. There was a pause. A moment too long. "I thought I'd drop these off for Ethan," she said gently, lifting the basket. "I wasn't sure if you still needed the apple pie, so I made one anyway. It's fresh." Marla looked behind her, as though checking to see if someone was watching. Then, with a shallow breath, she stepped onto the porch, closing the door halfway behind her. "Listen," she said, her voice low and careful. "It's probably best if you don't come in today. Things are a little full and loud. And you know how he gets when too many people are around." Took her a second to understand. "But she began, her voice catching. Marla didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She just tilted her head with a slight, almost apologetic shrug. "We've already set the table. I hope you understand." She stood still. Completely still. As if her body needed time to catch up to what her heart had just heard. The cold found its way through her gloves, into her fingers, into her chest. She glanced past Marla's shoulder, just for a second, hoping to see her son's face. Hoping he would come to the door. But he didn't. He was somewhere inside that warm house, the one she helped them buy, eating the meal she had once taught him to make. And he didn't come. "I see," she said finally. Her voice was steady now, like ice over deep water. "Of course. I should have called." Marla gave a tight smile. "It's just easier this way." She handed over the basket without another word. Marla took it politely, then disappeared behind the door. The latch clicked. Silence again. Except now the music inside had gotten louder. Someone laughed, her son maybe. Or maybe not. She turned back down the steps, one hand on the railing, each movement precise. Controlled. She walked to her car slowly, unwilling to cry out here in the driveway. Her keys felt too small in her hands, like they belonged to a stranger. Once inside the vehicle, she stared at the dashboard without starting the engine. 5 Christmases ago, this house had been theirs. A shared dream, a joint responsibility. Her son and Marla could not qualify for the loan on their own. She had offered her savings. Name. Her signature. She blinked once. Then again. The tears stayed put. The gloves came off. Her hands were older now, with veins she could trace like rivers. They had held her baby boy once. Wiped his nose. Patted his back when he cried over broken toys. They had signed mortgage papers with hope and pride, believing she was helping to build a legacy. Family stronghold. Safe place. She had not expected to be erased from it. The drive home was quiet. Frost touched the edges of her windshield. Radio off. Wipers clicking slowly. As the miles passed, her mind didn't wander, it sharpened. Every moment from the past few years replayed like scenes from a silent film. The slow retreat. The unanswered calls. The missed birthdays with polite excuses. The way Marla's tone had changed. Less like family, more like management. Even Ethan had stopped asking for her to come read bedtime stories. The signs had been there. She just didn't want to see them. Her small house stood dark when she arrived. A single porch light flickered. She went inside without turning on the TV. The clock ticked steadily in the hallway. She removed her coat slowly, laying it over the arm of the chair. Then she sat. And she stayed seated for a long time. Not sad. Not angry. Just still. It wasn't until the moonlight shifted across the floorboards that she finally moved. She reached for her side table drawer, pulled out a faded folder. Inside were copies of the loan agreement. Signatures. Her name listed just beneath her son's, in tidy blue ink. She had kept the original terms, of course. Just in case. She wasn't vengeful. She wasn't cruel. But she believed in fairness. And she had given more than enough. She placed the folder on the table. And then, without drama, without a single tear, she picked up her phone and called her lawyer. The morning after Christmas was quiet. Not the soft kind of quiet she once cherished, the kind that followed a house full of laughter and music, but the kind that echoed. That made the ticking of the kitchen clock sound like a metronome in an empty concert hall. She made tea the way she always had. 2 sugars, splash of milk, and set it on the windowsill beside the plant her grandson had once given her in a paper cup. The leaves were browning now. She did not water it. Outside, the world was painted in pale winter light. Her yard, once full of herbs and flowers, now lay bare under frost. The bird feeder hung crooked. No footprints marked the snow. She used to love this season. The baking, the crafts with Ethan, the decorating of the front porch. She used to string lights herself, even when her hands ached from arthritis. But this year, she left the box untouched in the attic. Something in her had already known. She moved through her small house like she had done for years, touching furniture she had refinished herself, dusting shelves where framed photos lived like artifacts. There was one of her and her son at his college graduation. Her arm around him, proud and tired, standing in front of the university fountain. She had worked double shifts back then. At the diner in the mornings, at the bookstore in the evenings. She had skipped buying new shoes to afford his textbooks. No one ever knew. She remembered the night he told her about Marla. She had smiled, genuinely happy for him, although something quiet inside her stirred. Marla was sharp, polished, confident. She spoke quickly, always with certainty. They had dinner together once, the 3 of them, and afterward Marla had said, "You've raised a wonderful man," in a way that felt like both compliment and closure. Later, when they decided to buy a house, her son had come to her with numbers, figures they couldn't meet on their own. He had been embarrassed, she could tell. He had said, "Just temporary, Mom. Just until we get back on our feet." And she had smiled again. 'Cause that is what mothers do. They stretch. They bend. They absorb. The money had come from her savings account. The one her late husband started years ago, when they were both working as school janitors. They had never had much, but they had built a life from discipline and patience. Her husband used to say, "We may not have a mansion, but we have a home." And for a time they did. When she signed the loan documents, she wore her best dress and painted her nails. Not for vanity, but because it felt like a moment, like she was doing something important. She remembered the way the banker spoke only to her son, and how Marla had smiled politely but checked her watch every few minutes. That was the first time she noticed a shift. Small, unspoken. The first Christmas in their new home had been warm, glowing. She brought her slow cooker, made her famous stuffing, and watched as Ethan tore wrapping paper off his presents. That night, Marla thanked her. Genuinely. But by the next holiday, she was asked to just bring dessert. The year after, she was asked to come after dinner, since the kids get overstimulated. Change was slight, justified, almost reasonable. But over time, it became a pattern she could not ignore. She had blamed herself for a while. Wondered if she had spoken out of turn, overstayed, hovered too much. She had backed away carefully, so carefully, never wanting to be a burden. She thought of herself as background music, there when needed, invisible when not. She learned to arrive with exact timing, to never expect more than a quick hug or a cup of tea. But it was never enough. She pulled an old quilt around her shoulders as she sat on the couch. The fireplace remained unlit. The folder with the mortgage documents still lay on the table, untouched since yesterday. It wasn't anger she felt, it was clarity. A strange, steady kind of knowing. Like the way you look at the ocean and suddenly realize how wide it is, how far it goes. She remembered one spring just 2 years ago, when Ethan had fallen off the monkey bars. Her son was stuck in traffic, and Marla had been out with friends. The school called her because she was still on the emergency list, still the one they trusted. She had rushed over, carried Ethan in her arms as he cried, sang softly to him in the waiting room of the clinic. He had fallen asleep against her chest, her sweater damp with his tears. That was the last time he had held her hand. She hadn't been asked to babysit since. She stood and moved to the bookshelf. Her fingers brushed the spines of novels she no longer read. She selected a journal instead, the one she kept in the drawer beneath her scarves. It had once been filled with grocery lists and birthdays, but now it held memories. Tiny, vivid ones. A recipe her mother taught her. The name of the first house she and her husband rented. The way her son had laughed the day they built a snowman with jelly bean buttons. She turned to a blank page. Then she paused. She opened the folder again and stared at the agreement. There were no threats written there. No revenge. Just facts. Name. Or rights. Her contribution. They had wanted her invisible. But paper remembers. The kettle began to whistle on the stove. She stood up slowly, folded the folder shut, and placed it back into the drawer. This time she would not explain herself. She would not write a long letter or leave a voicemail hoping for understanding. She would act with the same quiet grace that had defined her entire life. But this time she would not be erased. The following days moved slowly, each one framed by a quiet that pressed in from the walls. She busied herself with small tasks, cleaning drawers she had not opened in years, folding towels with care, trimming the rose bushes even though they were mostly bare. There was dignity in order, in motion, in keeping things neat even when the heart felt messy. She did not call her son. She did not message Marla. There was nothing left to clarify. And yet, even in silence, memories came knocking. Some with warmth, others with a sting so sharp she had to steady herself. There had been a time, not long ago, when her birthday had been celebrated with joy. A surprise brunch with balloons and laughter. Ethan had drawn her a card with stick figures and glitter, and Marla had smiled and said, "You're a blessing to our family." It was real. She had believed it. But slowly the tone changed. She noticed it first in small corrections. "Actually, we don't do juice before bed," Marla had said once, gently taking the cup from her hand. Then came the edited traditions. No more homemade treats, because of allergies. No more unannounced visits, because of the baby's nap schedule. And she adapted. Willingly. She wanted to be helpful, not intrusive. Yet no matter how careful she became, the distance grew. She remembered a summer barbecue. The backyard was loud with music and children's laughter. She had brought her potato salad, her son's favorite. It had sat untouched on the corner of the table, overshadowed by store-bought platters. She told herself it was nothing. But then came the photo. A group shot, everyone gathered around the table, Marla holding Ethan in her lap, her son with an arm around her shoulder. And she had been cropped out. Literally. Her sleeve barely visible on the edge of the frame. She hadn't said a word. She had just smiled. She had learned not to take it personally. At least, that's what she told herself. Families change. Priorities shift. Maybe this was what growing older looked like. Becoming a quiet echo in someone else's story. But the echo hurt. She found herself watching old home videos on her laptop. Her son, age 7, singing off-key in a school play. His toothless grin as he ran into her arms after the curtain call. Her late husband filming, laughing behind the camera. They had been a small family but close. Loyal. Now, she lived in a house filled with shadows of those days. Photos stayed on the walls, but the people inside them felt far away. She had even offered to update her will last year. She had sat across from her son and said, "I want to make sure things are fair." Marla had answered before he could, "We're not worried about that. You don't need to think about those things yet." Her tone was smooth, final, so she had let it go. But there were moments she could not forget. Like the time Ethan had made a school project about family history, and when she offered to help, Marla said, "His teacher prefers immediate influences." As if her decades of sacrifice, of carrying that family on her back during harder years, were no longer relevant. She wondered when, exactly, she had gone from being a mother to being an obligation. Now, after Christmas, she felt the cold not just on her skin but in her bones. And she welcomed it. Made things sharper, clearer. She began sorting through papers. Bills, receipts, bank statements. Not out of spite but out of practicality. She had co-signed the mortgage. She remembered every word of the contract. She had used her credit, her savings, her trust. And though she had never asked for anything in return, she knew she had rights. Not emotional ones, legal ones. Still she hesitated. Not because she doubted herself, but because part of her still held on to hope. That maybe her son would call. That he would say something. Anything. That he would ask how she was. That he had noticed her absence on Christmas Day. But the phone remained silent. Instead, on the third day, she received a message. From Marla. "Hi, just wanted to say thanks for the basket. Ethan loved the sweater. Hope you had a peaceful Christmas. We'll stop by sometime next week." There was no warmth in it. No apology. No acknowledgement of the moment at the door, the rejection, the weight of it. Just a casual nod, as if she were a neighbor who had dropped off cookies. She stared at the screen, then put the phone face down on the table. She had always been patient, always accommodating. She had learned how to stay out of the way, how to lower her expectations, how to fold her hurt into silence. But the ache had settled now into something sturdier. Resolve. She did not respond to the message. Instead, she pulled out the mortgage documents once more. This time, she marked a few sections with sticky notes. Not because she wanted to hurt them but because she needed to protect herself. From being used. From being forgotten. From being erased with polite smiles and closed doors. She called her lawyer again. They spoke for 30 minutes. Only. Quietly. The process was simple, he said. Legal, clean, and within her rights. He reminded her that her contribution was documented, acknowledged, and enforceable. She felt no glee. No triumph. Only peace. Later that night she lit a candle. Not for ambience but for memory. Her husband used to do the same when they made big decisions. Light a candle, sit in silence, and let the flame mark the moment. She sat on the edge of the bed, watching the small glow reflect in the window. This was not vengeance. This was self-respect. The letter arrived on a Monday. It was a formal envelope, pale gray with the law firm's emblem stamped neatly in the corner. Inside were 2 documents. One was a notification of her withdrawal as a co-signer from the mortgage agreement. The second was an official request for the remaining loan holders to assume full financial responsibility within 30 days. She didn't send it with spite. She didn't send it in anger. She sent it because she had been removed from their hearts long before she removed herself from their paperwork. She placed the envelope in her mailbox, tucked between catalogs and utility bills. The wind carried the scent of snow again, soft and clean. She did not check the box again that week. There was no need. She knew exactly when they received it. The call came 2 days later. Not from Marla, and not from her son. From the bank. A polite woman explained that the loan was being reassessed. That her name was no longer tied to it. That the remaining borrowers, her son and Marla, would be contacted for revised terms. She thanked the woman and ended the call with steady hands. That evening her phone rang. Her son. She stared at his name on the screen for a long time. It rang 6 times before going silent. He didn't leave a message. An hour later it rang again. This time she answered. "Mom." His voice was tight, unsure. "Hey. Can we talk?" She didn't speak right away. I got a call from the mortgage office. They said you removed your name from the loan. That can't be right, can it? She closed her eyes just for a second, then opened them. It's right, she said softly. There was silence on the line. Then, why would you do that? Question came hollow. As if he had forgotten the porch, the basket, the door that had quietly closed in her face. As if he hadn't stood by while she was told she wasn't welcome. I thought it was time, she said, to let go of things that don't need me anymore. That's not fair, Mom. She almost smiled. Fair. I signed on to help you both start. That was the agreement. But the agreement has changed, hasn't it? I didn't know Marla. He began, then stopped. Look, we didn't mean to hurt you. I know, she said. That's what makes it worse. More silence. Then a sigh that sounded more like confusion than remorse. We're going to have to refinance. Marla's furious. We might even lose the house. I hope you don't, she said gently. You didn't even warn us. No, she agreed. Just like I wasn't warned when I was no longer family. He didn't reply. Good night, she said, and ended the call. She stood by the window after that, watching her reflection blur in the glass. Outside, her porch light flickered again. She made a note to replace it. Something still needed tending. Over the next few days she heard nothing. No apologies. No visits. Only the distant sound of things shifting in a house that had once been built on shared dreams. She imagined the meetings they were having. The bank visits. The scrambling. The hard conversations. She imagined Marla's voice rising, sharp with blame. And her son, quiet perhaps. Or maybe defensive. Maybe angry. She did not know. She no longer needed to. Her lawyer sent confirmation the next week. The mortgage would go into reprocessing. Unless her son and Marla could assume full financial responsibility or find a new co-signer, the house would be at risk. She received another message. From Marla this time. A single line. I hope you're happy. She didn't answer. Instead she took a walk. Down the lane, past the park where she used to push Ethan on the swings. The air was bright, the sky clear. She breathed slowly, deeply. For the first time in months, her body felt light. She passed by a small cottage near the edge of the neighborhood. A for rent sign had just gone up. It was modest. White shutters, a wraparound porch, garden space in the back. A bird feeder hung from the tree. She paused in front of it for longer than she expected. By the next afternoon, she had scheduled a visit. By the end of the week, she had signed the lease. It wasn't far. Still close to the city, still reachable by bus. But it was hers. No memories clung to the walls. No half-heard arguments seeped through them. Just space. Just peace. She packed quietly over the weekend. Books, linens, the photo of her husband in its worn wooden frame. She didn't take much. Just what she needed. The rest she left behind, donating or giving away. Her home no longer needed to be filled with reminders. She made one final visit to the cemetery before she moved. Her husband's name etched cleanly in stone. She sat beside him for a long time, telling him everything. Not aloud. Just silently, the way they used to sit on the porch with coffee, saying nothing but understanding everything. I'm all right, she whispered at last. You'd be proud of me. She left a small pine cone wreath on the grave. Made. Simple. Honest. Just like her. The move took half a day. Few boxes. A neighbor's borrowed truck. No announcements. No fanfare. She arranged her space slowly, carefully. Each curtain pulled with purpose, each drawer lined with fresh paper. That night she lit a candle again. Not because anything needed blessing, but because something had finally ended. And something else had quietly begun. The new house did not creak the way her old one did. It was smaller, yes, but quiet in a different way, gentler. As if the walls had never been asked to carry too much history. She moved through the rooms with ease now. No reminders. No waiting. She hung sheer curtains that let in soft light. She bought herself a kettle with a bird-shaped whistle, something she had always thought was frivolous. She placed her husband's photo beside the small lamp on the windowsill, where the light hit his smile just right in the afternoons. And in the garden, she planted lavender. Each morning she made tea and walked barefoot to the porch. The air felt different here. Lighter. Time moved the same, but it didn't feel as heavy. She didn't expect anyone to call. And for a while no one did. But slowly messages came. From neighbors who had noticed the moving van. From a cousin who had seen her at the post office and mentioned that, "People are talking." Nothing cruel. Just curiosity. Small town ripples. Then one evening the phone rang again. Her son. She watched it ring. Watched his name flicker across the screen like a visitor knocking at a door that had once been his. She answered. "Hi, Mom," he said. The voice was slower now. Hello. I wanted to check in. I heard you moved." "Yes," she replied. "It was time." Then, "You didn't tell me. You didn't ask." There was no bitterness in her voice. Only fact. Only quiet truth. Another pause. Then he sighed. That deep exhale of someone trying to hold the pieces of something that's already broken. We're going to sell the house." She waited. "We couldn't get the refinancing," he continued. "The payments are too high without your credit." "I see. Marla, she's been upset. Says this isn't how families handle things." She said nothing. "She thinks you acted out of spite." Still she said nothing. I told her it wasn't like that," he said softer now. "That you helped us when no one else would. That we should have treated you better." Shift. His voice cracked slightly. "I just didn't know how far it had gone. How far we had pushed you away." She didn't speak right away. Then, "I didn't do this to hurt you. I know. I did it because I realized I was staying in a place that no longer saw me." He breathed out slowly. "I miss you," he said finally. She closed her eyes. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Seed. "I miss you too," she said. "But I had to remember who I was before I was left outside the door." He didn't argue. He only said, "I'll call again soon. If that's okay." "It's okay." They hung up without goodbye. But it wasn't silence this time. It was space. Space for something that could grow again if tended carefully. That night she made a pie. Not for anyone else. Just because she wanted to. The scent of cinnamon filled the kitchen. She ate a slice on the porch, watching the stars rise slowly above the hills. She thought of Ethan. Wondered what he had been told. Wondered if he remembered the reindeer sweater. Wondered if he missed her. Children feel the weight of change, even if they cannot name it. She did not expect him to understand yet. But someday he might. In her new home she started a new journal. Not to document pain but to record peace. Little things. The way the sunlight fell through the blinds at 3 p.m. The robin that returned each morning. The neighbor who brought her a fresh loaf of bread. Just because. One afternoon weeks later a letter arrived. It was from her son. The handwriting was uneven. He had never been neat, but it was unmistakably his. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a photo, and a note. The photo was of Ethan holding the knitted reindeer sweater, standing next to the Christmas tree. His face was serious, but his eyes were warm. The note read, "Ethan asked why you didn't come to Christmas. I didn't know what to say. So I showed him your sweater. He wore it all day." She placed the photo on her fridge. Not with pride. Not with sorrow. Just with tenderness. The past had happened. The hurt had been real. But here, in this small moment, was proof that something of her still remained. Not just in the house she had once helped build, but in the boy who wore her sweater with quiet honor. She didn't rush to write back. Instead, she picked up her knitting needles and started something new. Not because it would be delivered, but because it felt right to begin again. Spring arrived slowly that year. It came not with sudden warmth, but with signs. A shift in the wind. The return of birdsong. Buds pushing through thawed earth like quiet promises. She noticed these things more now. Perhaps because there was space in her mind to notice them. Perhaps because there was no longer noise she had to filter through. Her mornings became ritual. Tea on the porch. A book she did not always read. And silence. The kind that held her. Not the kind that ignored her. She had not heard from Marla again. She didn't expect to. Some people vanish when they lose control. Others stay loud. But Marla had always preferred precision. And silence was her sharpest tool. It didn't matter. Her son called once a week now. Sometimes just to ask how she was. Sometimes to say nothing much at all. They never spoke about the house again. That chapter had closed and they had let it close. She had no desire to reopen old doors. She was building a life where every room belonged to her. The garden bloomed. Lavender and thyme in neat rows. She planted tomatoes. Watched squirrels race across the fence line. There was a rhythm here, one that asked nothing of her except to witness it. Occasionally, she would still think of the day on the porch, the moment Marla had blocked the doorway with a soft voice and a firm hand. It no longer hurt in the way it once had. It existed now like a scar. Not ugly, just real. She kept the photo of Ethan on the fridge. The sweater fit him snugly that year. He would outgrow it soon. That was all right. Children outgrew things. The point was not the sweater. It was the fact that he had worn it. That he had asked about her. One Saturday afternoon, as the breeze drifted through the window, she heard a knock on the door. It was her son. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, a hesitation in his shoulders she hadn't seen since he was a teenager. Behind him stood Ethan, clutching a paper bag. His eyes darted around the porch, curious and quiet. "We were in the area," her son said. "Thought we'd stop by." She nodded once, stepped aside. Ethan entered first, his sneakers thudding softly on the wood floor. He walked with the unshaped confidence of a child still learning the world. He looked around with interest, then stopped when he saw the fridge. "That's me," he said, pointing at the photo. She smiled. "Yes. You wore the sweater." He nodded. "Mom said you made it." "I did." He dug into the paper bag and pulled out a Tupperware dish. "I made cookies. Dad helped." She took the container gently. Sugar cookies, uneven edges, sprinkles scattered like small explosions of color. They weren't perfect, but they were his. "Thank you." Her son stood in the doorway still, unsure of his place. "I didn't know what you'd say," he admitted. "About us coming." "You came," she replied. "That says more than anything else." He looked older now. Not in the lines on his face, but in his eyes. Eyes that had seen consequence. That had known silence and wished it away. "We sold the house," he said. "It's done. We're moving to a smaller place." She nodded. "I thought we needed space," he continued. "But what we needed was closeness. The kind we used to have. Before we let it slip." She didn't speak right away. "There's no manual for this," he added. "Being an adult. Being a son. Being better." "No," she said. "But there's always the chance to try again." He stepped forward and hugged her. Gently. With the kind of care you offer to something you thought you had lost. Ethan watched them quietly. Then tugged at his father's hand. "Can we see the garden?" he asked. She led them outside. The sun was lower now, casting golden lines through the trees. Birds flitted through the branches. A bee hovered over a blooming rosemary bush. Ethan knelt in front of the tomato plants. "Can I help plant next time?" he asked. "Of course," she said. Next time. It wasn't everything. It wasn't the past undone. But it was a start. Later, after they left, she stood alone in the garden. The wind danced through the lavender. Her fingers brushed the leaves. She closed her eyes. Once, she had been told she wasn't welcome. Not directly, but clearly. She had walked away with grace. And with her name. Now she stood here, rooted, steady, and entirely her own. She picked a sprig of thyme and brought it inside. As the evening settled, she lit a candle. Not for tradition. Not for memory, but for herself. A single light, small and steady, glowing against the dark. She sat by the window with her tea, watching it flicker. Some people rage to reclaim their place. Others do it by planting seeds and waiting for the ones who remember how things used to feel. She had not shouted. She had not fought. But she had been heard. And that was enough.